Hi, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, 12 extraordinary conversations I'm having with amazing female soul stewards who at this time are transmitting their unconditional love, empathy and compassion about the creation of a new level of living, and therefore helping us to form ideas about a brave new world that we can create together. Have a wonderful time listening in. And already I see Joe. Welcome, Joe, Fernando. And two other people joined, whoever the two other people are. Laura, Sarah, welcome. Welcome, Yolanda, who I think I'm going to be meeting later in the week. Sue Barrett. Oh, wonderful people. Draw them all in quickly. Just send messages to all of your peers saying, join the deep dialogue with the splendid and fascinating and very beautiful, I must say, Susan Mears and Stewart Pearce, because we're going to have a wonderful time. So I think we should begin because it is 2031 and people will be coming in. So firstly, just an official welcome
to
you. Wonderful Susan Mears. What I'm going to do, if you don't mind, is just to formalize the whole substance of our conversation by sharing your bio with everybody. And to all the people that are tuning in, Ambika, hello!
Hello,
and
Ambika.
Joe, it's wonderful to see you. We're so, did you hear that, Ambika? Joan, Susan obviously noticed, so she's saying hello. So welcome all the people that are tuning in. This is Stewart Pearce with the wonderful and irresistible Susan Mears, who is going to be talking about the soul of publishing. So to begin with, so you know who Susan is. So Susan has been involved in publishing since graduating from university and initially worked at Hutchinson and then became managing editor at the Active Books, where she built up their hugely successful health and mind, body, spirit list of writers. She then subsequently became the managing editor at Element Books, where she was responsible for commissioning the multi-million best-selling translation of the Tao Te Ching by Martin Palmer and the late lamented Jay Ramsey. In 1993, Susan set up her own independent literary agency, which has become one of the leading UK, US-based agencies for leading-edge thrillers, quality fiction, memoirs, outstanding titles covering religion, health, and of course, spirituality. Among Susan's high-profile clients have been Peter Lemarizier, a million best-selling author of The Great Pyramid Code, Adrian Gilbert, best-selling author of The Mayan Prophecies, and Martin Palmer, one of the world authorities for religion and conservation, advising the UN Secretary General nonetheless. Suffice to say, Susan has a reputation in literary circles as a formidable supporter of the neo-paradigm human potential movement and supports the arousal of the divine feminine. Welcome, the wonderful Susan Mears.
Thank you.
I know we know each other, which is immensely fortunate for a platform like this, and what a glorious, glorious friendship. Thank you so much for all of your glorious support of my endeavors over the years. And of course, literature is one of your greatest loves, the whole substance of it.
Yes.
Where did it all begin?
I think I really loved books from a very early age and read obsessively. And I think I was quite a solitary child in many respects, because my father was and is very active in the Church of England. He was a canon at Exeter Cathedral, but we, of course, in the way of clergy families, we moved around an awful lot. Every 4 years or so, we'd move to a new place, and so I would make new friends. But I always loved my books. My books were my constant companions. And I have to say, it wasn't just the content of the books. I was always fascinated by the way books were put together. And I used to write books and make books, in a slightly Bronte fashion, I guess. But I like creating them too. And my brother, who's a journalist, is just the same. He also was not only an avid reader of books, but also a creator and writer of books. So And of course, both my parents were great and are great readers. So literature and the arts have always been very, very important to us as a family. So yes, it was a passion that started very early on.
And presumably began with the great stories of yore, or those that had been transposed. Yes. Did you have favourite writers?
I did, yes. I mean, when I was very young, my favourite book was obviously the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, which are slightly grotesque, but of course they fascinate a child's mind. And also, I loved. I had the sort of Child's Tales of Ulysses, which was a great favourite. A Hamlin illustrated book with wonderful pictures in it. So I loved that too. And then as I got older, I loved C.S. Lewis and the Narnia tales. He was a great favourite, and Tolkien. The Hobbit was a huge favourite as well. And if I loved a book, I'd read it and reread it. I mean, it was never enough to read a book once. So yes, a passion from a very, very early age, really. Yeah.
So many of these writers were writing of other realms, of other dominions.
Yes.
And what was it in your wonderful innocence? What was it that drew you to these other realms?
I think it was a lot to do with going back to being a clergyman's daughter and different rectories that we lived in that were always quite large and spooky buildings, and of course the churches would be surrounded by graveyards, and so my brother, sister, and I would play hide and seek amongst these tombstones, and that would be a sort of dare after Sunday evening service to go and run into the graveyard and hide behind these extraordinary monument type tombs. And so I mean, there's one in particular, Cradley Church. It was had a kind of mini, almost Highgate cemetery, and it was full of amazing sculptures of angels, the wings outstretched, and this kind of thing. So we'd go and hide amongst them and scream and run away. So I was fascinated from an early age about ghosts and was there an afterlife and that sort of thing. So there was a natural pull towards the spiritual from an early age too. So that's always been there. That fascination has always been there.
Mm-hmm. And were your parents, your father particularly, were they constantly in the warm address of the spiritual toolkit using Christian precepts? I wonder if they were, because the number of the writers that you've spoken of were mythological writers, were they not? And
yes.
Great stories that they were telling of other realms or other dimensions were always laced with extraordinary precepts about the human spirit or the human soul. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would say, both my parents are very devout Christians and deep believers, but also very inquiring minds and very knowledgeable about other areas of spirituality too. So we always had very open conversations, and certainly I didn't have Orthodox Christianity hammered into me, as it were. I mean, it was a loving encounter with Christianity, very definitely. And my father would say, "Well, I believe you can knock on the door, but don't bash the door down." so yes, a gentle form of Christianity. Yes. Which
this is really
a blessing.
By the warmth, because it felt as though you were being caressed into the substance of these stories could transpose into a meaning about life.
Yes, and of course, yes. I mean, wonderful to encounter buildings like, for example, my father was at Exeter Cathedral, this amazing building, and knowing all the nooks and crannies and the hidden places as well, because these cathedrals are such a testimony to faith over the years, and it's very sobering to stand in a cathedral and see all these tombs of courtiers and kings and amazing things like ancient medieval clocks and beautiful carvings, and there's this sense of timelessness being out of time when you're in a building like that, which is, of course, a testimony to faith and to deep belief, but also it's out of time. You're in a place that's aligned above with the heavens and with the earth, and full of beautiful artifacts. So you're in a place of transcendence, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fascinating. This is something that came into the deep dialogue of last week with Jean Houston, where she was telling us a story of how, as a child, she met Albert Einstein, and how Einstein was asked by a number of quantum physicist students, which books do you think we should read? And of course, Einstein said, read fairy tales.
Yes.
And then apparently he was asked yet again, but surely there are more considerable tomes that we should be reading. And Einstein said, read fairy tales.
Yes.
And so as you speak, it feels as though the otherworldliness, the other realms, were providing you with the fodder, so to speak, for your imagination. So that you were actually able to move between the worlds. And of course, the heritage that you were, as it were, playing within, I'm sure you were playing in a very decorous way inside Mexed Cathedral. But the fascination of the child moving from the supernatural of the gravestone into the wonder and the awe of this great medieval cathedral must have been awaking you tremendously. And then, of course, when you went to university, you read literature.
Yes, I did, and my I remember being asked by somebody, why are you? I read English and French literature, so obviously when you do a dual degree like that, you have to be selective. So I specialised in the 20th century novel, 19th and 20th century novels for French literature, and mainly 20th century novel also for English literature. Of course, having done things like Chaucer, etc. at school, but I actually believed profoundly that I would find truth in literature. That was my belief, and that was why I chose to study literature.
I wonder, could you possibly repeat that again? Because that was so beautiful. Could you repeat
that again?
Yes,
I profoundly believed that I would find truth in literature. And that was my reason for going to study English and French literature. And I was lucky enough to go to the Sorbonne and to study there, which was amazing. It was incredible lecture halls and amazing buildings. So, and then of course being in the rarefied atmosphere, the left bank, and it was really exciting and wonderful, and it was a great adventure studying literature, and I certainly don't regret it. And wonderful to look into the minds of great writers, of course. And my particular favourites actually were probably D.H. Lawrence and Joseph Conrad and Gustave Flaubert.
And Flaubert,
so,
yes.
Yes.
So, wow, so naturalistic writers that were really changing the whole face of literature.
Very much so. Yes, I mean, D.H. Lawrence was so ahead of his time. He was a true visionary and an extraordinary man. I mean, you can read Lawrence's poetry even now, and it's so contemporary. And of course, Conrad too. I mean, if you look at writing like Nostromo or The Heart of Darkness, there you see a man who profoundly understood the human dilemma and dualism and the fall into materialism, and how Nostromo is primarily about how materialism and material concerns corrupt even the incorruptible. So the powerful voices, absolutely amazing voices that resonate.
So balancing this rich information that you're sharing with us, and then speeding forward in a time machine to say the last 15 or 20 years of your extraordinary career in publishing, both as a person who purveys books, or rather seduces authors into writing in a magical and imaginative and successful way, into selling books. What would you say would be the prima facie values for great books of today?
I would say there's been a shift in the last few years, and I've seen it happen in publishing, and it's not necessarily beneficial, I have to say. And it's actually the financial imperative that has come in. And so there was a shift probably in reality about 20 years ago, where the editor became less all-powerful, and the accountants came in and started running publishing and fueling publishing decisions. So, and of course, it meant that, you know, the book fairs, that there was less bargaining actually in situ, because editors had to go back and get things approved after the event by accountants. And of course, when that happens, it tends to stifle creativity, because each editor then becomes an individual profit center, and that puts a huge pressure really on the editor to make money, to be a cash generator. And so inevitably that leads to a reliance on using people who are known entities. And by that I mean writers with established track records, and also celebrities, etc. So it really tends to shift things a gear in publishing, and it means that editors want to play safe, unfortunately. And the ultimate corollary of that, of course, is that less new talent is fostered. I mean, I would question whether D.H. Lawrence or indeed Dickens would be commissioned these days, because you know, they were both guys who came from nowhere with extraordinary talent. H.G. Wells would be another example. You know, just from nowhere with amazing talent, who burst into the writing scene and were hugely successful. And why were they successful? They're successful because they were lionized and supported by significant people. I mean, for example, if you look at Lady Ottoline Morell and the Bloomsbury set, I mean, the work she did in supporting up-and-coming talent was huge. I mean, she was behind the success of D.H. Lawrence and Aldous Huxley and people like that. And that, in a way, is what publishers ought to do, but they're unable to, because of the financial imperatives resting upon editors these days. I mean, it's not all bad, it's not all terrible, but it does create a pressure that didn't used to be there. And so new talent, it's harder for new talent to break through. And of course, as an agent, I mean, that one likes to be there to encourage that new talent and to do as much as possible to encourage people into print. And I see that as a role. I mean, more and more, that's the role the agent plays, because I mean, when I trained in publishing, obviously, you know, one of the first jobs is going through the slush pile, and that just doesn't happen anymore. There isn't anybody there who is employed to go through the slush pile. So that whittling process is undertaken by the agent these days. So there's it's quite a task.
The listeners, could you explain what the slush pile is?
So the slush pile, that was always the slush pile. It's a derogatory term. It's awful, really. But you know, that was the pile of unsolicited manuscripts. So people would hopefully send in whole manuscripts, and you know, when I trained in publishing, I would go through them. That was, you know, as a junior editor, that was part of your job. Partly you'd be copy editing, partly writing copy for jackets and covers, and going through the unsolicited manuscripts. And sometimes you'd find a jewel. But that doesn't happen. That role no longer exists. So the onus is on the agent to do that process. But of course, even with agents, we have a pressure on us too. I mean, it's so easy just to say, well, you know, we only want people with track record on our books, because that makes it easier for us too. We can earn our commission far more readily. So yes, it is publishing is shifting and changing, and not everything's for the best. It just makes it more challenging to get new raw talent out there. That's basically the issue.
Well, this is extraordinary, because I hear a subtle tone of frustration, but at the same time, I feel that you also have ideas of creating a mini revolution. I don't know how much you can reveal, but you know, I just wondered if we returned, because obviously what we're seeing is the way that publishing has shifted, as you say, over the last 20 years, and particularly the mitigating circumstance of what took place in 2008, which was really, the bedrock really quaked hugely, wasn't it?
That's
right. I know
right.
a number of publishers were really threatened by the possibility of extinction. And so, again, as we see in the corporatocracy, commercialization took over. And as we see, great talent then became subsumed, or possibly the discovery of great talent. However, as we also know, there were some extraordinary writers that moved through. And as you consider all of the great writers that you've had the fortune of being able to elicit and initiate into the publishing of their books, were there particular values that you felt were being presented to the world that helped at that time to stabilize culture?
You mean in terms of actually fixing points of reference culturally?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, for example, I could give an example of a writer who came to me when I first set up my literary agency, and he was a great friend of another author of mine who'd been very successful, and he was wanting to write about the parallels between Christianity and ancient religions such as the Egyptian tradition, the tradition of Mithras, the Zoroastrian tradition, etc., etc. And that writer was Timothy Freak. Now, I mean, Timothy went on this extraordinary journey, and Tim actually wrote 4 or 5 books that were moderately successful. And then, of course, he broke through hugely with the Jesus Mysteries, which was such an important seminal work, and had a huge influence. And still has. So writers can. Sometimes I think writing is almost like a muscle that one develops, and one develops one's style, and there's a progression that goes on. And I think his work is a very good example of that. So there's it gradually stepping up. But I mean, a lot of writers go through that process of development. But I think this whole issue of encouraging new talent is critical, and that is an area that is somewhat deficient in publishing these days. I mean, one person I would single out, who I think is doing a wonderful job for that, is Isabella Bullhall at Emirates Festival in Dubai, and she's done this amazing. She's been running this amazing literary festival for quite a few years now, but what I really like about her approach is she does have that kind of writer's salon tradition where she gets writers presenting and speaking to their audiences and interacting, and really encourages that whole development from beginning to mature writer in a really interesting forum, and brings in members of the public and shares projects in a really open way. So I think that kind of approach should be encouraged. I think that's a great thing, and I love the work she's doing. I think that's a sort of literary salon writ large, and we need more of that kind of thing. And of course, a lot of authors are now, they get so overwhelmed really by the difficulties of getting into print, and so a lot of people are drawn towards self-publishing. But that's fraught with difficulties and breaking through in that area. I mean, it can be very, very successful, but you've got to have the right support. You've got to have a very clear vision about what you're putting out there, what's different, and also having the support of PR, marketing, and a good network if you're going to do that. So it's not an easy option. So there are many strong arguments still for traditional publishing. That's what I would say.
And so when we go back to the substance of values and reflect on what took place, well, I suppose it's now 15 years ago, with the extraordinary innovation in many ways of J.K. Rowling and her work, juxtaposed, of course, with the fact that the Tolkien stories then suddenly became cinemagraphically presented.
Yes,
I think I'm right in saying that the Harry Potter series of movies were the biggest box office success in cinematographic history.
Yes, yes.
It indicates, both visual representations arising out of good literature
That's right. And also, yes, and I think also the resurgence of mythology in many respects, a magic, mystery, mythology, other dimensions. I think that's I think that the Harry Potter series showcased that and opened that world to obviously to young readers and but also broader than that. It created a fascination with those realms across society. So yes, it was.
There was
quite
obviously
a sea change.
A deep need, maybe even a chthonic, very deep archetypal need in people's consciousness.
Yes, I think so. Yes,
for the mythological, for the imaginal, and for the extraordinary romance or epic detail of those rather beautiful.
Yes, and the hero or heroine's journey, etc., etc. Very much so. Yes. So these are the ancient elements that have always been there in storytelling, from sort of fireside mythology that was memorized and repeated, and it's a deep thread and a deep need, I think, within human consciousness. And so yes, in many respects the Harry Potter movies and books helped to revive that, and yes, did send people back to Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, etc., and those great writers of mystery and imagination.
And so if you were to, I know this is a little bit of a stretch from imagination, but if you were to put on your prophetess's cap and look into the not so distant future, do you feel that there are major themes or mythic proportions that, there may be many contemporary writers listening in this evening, or indeed into this particular interview, which will go on record, go into the library of these deep dialogues, because, here you are, all you wonderful women, you're soul stewards of this contemporary time. And there are 12 of you, so we're creating this wonderful sacred circle of all of these different experiences and wisdoms and revelations that you're coming forth with. Is there any particular theme or any story that you would like re-evoked?
To me, one of the most important themes at the moment, I feel, is the return of the goddess, and the goddess as Gaia, and our custodianship of the goddess as embodied in the earth. And I think that's a profoundly important myth or story for our time that will be retold by many people in many ways. I mean, we were talking earlier on about the tragic happenings in China with the Three Gorges Dam, which looks as though it's about to burst, and possibly huge loss of life. Somehow, in the rise and race for technology and so-called improvements, we've lost sight of the earth. We haven't listened to the earth. We've raped the earth, and there is a rebalancing going on. And frankly, Gaia will rebalance without us if we don't attune to that. And I see women as spearheading that. Women have always had that attunement to the earth. If you look back at history and how women were always the healers, the ones who grew the herbs, the ones who tended the plants. So we have this deep bond, apart from childbirth and bearing children. There's this deep bond to the earth and custodianship of the earth that is profoundly feminine. I mean, even if you look at something like Greta Thunberg now, I mean, she's espousing that. I mean, an extraordinary girl who's just decided, well, I'm really outraged and setting off, and amazing, in a tent outside Davos, trying to spread the message. I mean, extraordinary courage and tenacity, and that, to me, that's the rise of the powerful feminine, and it is the feminine that will save us. That reconnecting to the earth, that honouring of the earth, that is what will save humanity. And of course, within corporate structures, that women, the feminine has to return, and is returning. It would be great if it was happening more rapidly, but there is a big sea change going on. So yes, the return of the goddess, the return of Gaia, Kuan Yin.
Exactly. And So I hope all the budding writers out there are really considering this, both ladies and men, because although
Yes.
we're speaking very formidably about the ladies being in organic support of the arousal of the divine feminine, particularly vis-a-vis the Gaia, as Susan said, that we men are in warm support, hoping
Yes.
to go through vulnerability, through sensitivity, give our energies to you as you rise.
Yes.
And indeed we are, you know, I mean, I remember the latter part of my book, Diana, The Voice of Change. I've listed some very extraordinary statistics about the women that are now gaining power. And of course, you know, that was written last year. So when we see in this span of the year, the extraordinary work of Jacinda Ardern, so women are moving into enlightened leadership roles, which is really quite extraordinary. And maybe even this little series of 12 deep dialogues is also going to stimulate that.
100%, yes. And one thing I want to say also, I mean, as you know, I do a lot of work in the Middle East, Dubai, Oman, Abu Dhabi, etc. And one thing I absolutely love is that there is a genuine movement towards empowering women in business, and you know, leaders and political leaders like Sheikh Maktoum, who's obviously, I mean, he's a hereditary leader, but he's quite enlightened, and he's very keen on getting women into business. And I actually see transformation in that world starting to happen quite quickly, and even changes going on in Saudi in that respect. So women are coming to the fore. They're becoming powerful in business. They are gaining a voice. So that is a really, really encouraging movement that's going on, and women within publishing out there as well, getting very, very strong voices. I've got a wonderful lady film director I'm working with in Oman, Musna Al Musafa, who's absolutely marvelous. So there are really strong, amazing women within that world getting their voice. It's no longer women behind the veil. They're coming out and becoming powerful, and all credit to them. I think it's really exciting what's going on there. And you know, I definitely, you know, within the work I do, because obviously a lot of the work I do is about not just book, but book to film, book to TV, and I've got really strong people that I work with in that area, like Jan Lee Chapman, and you know, there's a wonderful undercurrent going on of positive change in that respect, where women are starting to pioneer in the film and television world, and that's going to get stronger and stronger. So yes, we're out there, and I think there's also a change going on within men, where there's a rebalancing going on as women become more powerful. There's a delicate fine tuning and rebalancing, which is all to the good ultimately for our society.
And so it seems that what you're really suggesting is that the visual cultures of film and of course, you know, these extraordinary vehicles that have been created recently, such as Netflix, to bring about the serialization of great literature into filmic form, that there could be this wonderful marriage between the substance of new writing and how new writing can explore mythic proportions, but within a contemporary setting. But those people who are listening in who are writers, who are, you know, who have these special dreams of works that they would love to present, do you have advice for new writer?
I absolutely. Keep hammering on doors and don't take no for an answer. I mean, the J.K. Rowling story is absolutely that's the journey of a writer. You never take no for an answer. You keep bashing on doors. You have to have that absolute tenacity and belief in your work. And if you have that passion and that belief, then an agent's going to at some point be inspired by you and decide to take you on, or a publisher is. I mean, they will get your enthusiasm. So just keep going and hone and refine your work. Never think it's finished. Editing is always an ongoing process. So always be the best you can and get other people to input into your writing. You know, go to writers groups, share your work with others. Allow your work to be critiqued. The old idea, oh, well, I've written this amazing magnum opus and now I'm going to stuff it in a drawer and it'll be discovered at one point. That's not going to happen. You've got to get out there. You've got to expose your work to the general public as much as possible, to friends, family. Just share it. Just hammer on all doors, because you will break through. If you've got a strong message and you can write, then you'll make it. People like I'm here, other agents, other publishers, we're out there. We're actively looking for inspiring new work. So.
Beautiful. So I hear, obviously you have a very seasoned palette as far as great literature is concerned. But what I'm also hearing is how the writer needs to have the commercial reality in mind and in heart and in soul, so that they recognize that the passion of their writing can be brought forth. And so when you're, as it were, meeting with or interviewing new writers that have sent in their manuscripts to you, and you like the work and you meet them, I hear you speak of tenacity, which of course is a very fiery passion. Are there particular qualities that you look into the individual for? From their personality point of view.
I think it didn't used to be the case, but now authors have to be very, I go back to PR and marketing and getting out there. Authors have to be very, very active. They have to be prepared to get on social media, to get out there and talk about their work on a big platform. And the more work they do on that, the easier it is to break through. So, yes, no good being a shrinking violet. You've really got to get out there and bang your drum. And if you think you've got something good to say, tell people. And also tell people why it's different. What makes your work different? Because it's so easy to say, what can I add to the sum total of everything that's been written? And the reality is every writer could say that. Of course, you've got something to add, but you have to be very specific about what it is or what makes your work different and what your passion is. How do you communicate that passion? That's the key. Passion always wins through. Enthusiasm.
It almost feels as though a third of the production line is the material that's been written.
Yes.
And of course, it needs to be enlivened with spirit and full of passion and intelligently crafted. But then it seems that what you're saying is that 2/3 of the production needs to be about the individual themselves and how willing they are to camera or indeed into radio interviews and to employ social media, not from any hack point of view, but literally to disseminate the information about their books.
Yes, absolutely. And not to be afraid to get training. I mean, to get trained, for example, in how to speak, in how to project, and how to present. It's all about, you have to see yourself as a brand. How do you market yourself as a brand? I mean, more and more, that's so important. You have to think about the way you're presenting, the way you're dressed, the way you communicate. And you'll have friends, you'll have colleagues who will make constructive criticism. Ask them to do that. That way you will make progress, because you'll start to see yourself as others perceive you, and you'll see where you can improve things, where you can change things, how you can refine your brand. It's a corporate exercise in a sense. But that's how you have to see it.
And as an educator, dare I say, I begin to feel that we have a course in mind. That,
yes,
both
indeed.
with all of your wisdom about the nature of the great book, and also to how the great book can be mobilized. And then there's me with all of the body language skills as a communication.
100%. Yes.
And I know that when I first met the managing director of Findhorn Press, and they took on my first book, and then the second, then the third, then the fourth, and the Oracles, that I worked with a number of new writers that they had found to help them present, and that it was quite staggering to find that the great genius was not necessarily able to embody the great message in terms of...
No, that's so often the case.
Or the microphone.
Yes.
So dare I say maybe there's a project for us both in the future.
Definitely. Happy to collaborate.
And Do you feel that coming forward to this extraordinary time in which we're living, do you feel that the global pause may have encouraged people to go within and therefore to develop or nourish the instinct of their creativity? And particularly bearing in mind what you were sharing with us at the beginning about how your intelligence, but also your feeling passions or your feeling nature was awakened. They were awakened by the substance of great literature.
Yes, I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, this global lockdown, I think, has enabled people to take stock and to go within. And I think in that sense, it's been profoundly beneficial because we've actually had to put aside all the rushing around. And I think that, I mean, it's a challenge, I have to say. Suddenly not to be rushing to meetings, not to be dashing on planes and going here, there and everywhere is a significant change and shift. But if you can embrace it and go within and use it as a chance to take stock and to go deep into prayer, meditation, contemplation of your life's work and where you're going, I think it can be hugely beneficial. I think it can help you refocus. And I think a lot of people that I'm speaking to are finding that. I mean, I would say that for me, it was. I mean, I've been. I live near Stratford-on-Avon, in the countryside on a beautiful farm. So I'm working, and then I go out with the animals and walk in the countryside. And that time is meditational time. It's downtime, but it's also time to take stock and reflect about the projects I'm working on, where I'm going with the business and with my life and my inner life, in a way that I wouldn't have done were it not for the global pause. So I think it has been beneficial, and also that extraordinary beauty that we had for a few weeks, where planes weren't flying overhead and sunsets returned. And you go out and recognise the beauty of the softness of the rain, instead of it just being a nuisance, ruining your hair when you're running to a meeting. All that sort of thing is it's nurturing. It's nurturing, deeply nurturing of the soul, I think. Beautiful. So it's been beneficial.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And as you speak, I'm reminded of the fact that as soon as we went into that thing called lockdown, which I know we tend to call the global pause, Mother Nature took over as we moved into stillness. And as you say, the planes stopped flying over our heads, and there was less traffic on the road because people really were staying at home. But it seemed, and I know I just got back from Egypt running a retreat, and of course when I'd left, there were no buds on the trees. The trees were still in the starkness of winter. And then as I got back, suddenly there were buds. But within 10 days, at the beginning of silence here in London, as I still am, the trees just became emblazoned with their own wonderful, intoxicating foliage. In other words, again, I'm just drawing parallels symbolically. That Mother seemed to know that we were going through a very unique point of silence and stillness to drop deep into the conversation of what she wished to reveal to us. Yeah.
Yes.
So
and the birdsong returns and etc. It was just amazing, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so
I'm just going to put my light on.
Bearing in mind that we're really talking about the magic of the supernatural or the preternatural world coming into our consciousness as 3D beings.
Yes.
If you were a sorceress and you had a mighty wand, probably with a beautiful on the end, and you waved your wand in the consideration of creating great magic, meaning that you were wishing to bring forth a writer, perhaps a writer that you know, or perhaps a writer that you don't know, with a subject matter that you would like to bring forth from the realms of magic into the realms of the contemporary 3D perspective. Who would be the writer, or what sort of quality would the writer represent? And indeed, what would be their theme?
Good question. I think the writer would be the goddess Kuan Yin, and I would love her to write a book about the deep feminine and the healing of the deep feminine, and the healing of the earth and humanity. I love the symbolism of Kuan Yin on the ocean with her rose in her hand and the rabbit. It's a beautiful evocation of tender femininity and rebirth and resurgence. And so, yes, a book from Kuan Yin.
That's wonderful.
Why not?
That's really wonderful. I hope that's going to stir the imagination of a wonderful female writer who's listening in to this deep dialogue. Is there do you have a favorite journey or a series of precepts, spiritual teachings that you would again just simply puff with your wand and Kuan Yin would say, "Of course, my dear, let's bring forth these teachings"? Any particular teaching?
Yes, I mean, to me, the very rich vein that has always fascinated me is the Celtic and the Druidic tradition, and that feeling of the harmony with nature, the green wood, that feeling of regeneration within greenness and beauty, that comes from the earth, from the trees, from the animals. That to me is the most nurturing, wonderful feeling. And yes, I've always been somebody who I see God all around, God in nature, God in the beauty of the earth. So yes, so that tradition and that wonderful, I mean, so many emanations of the Celtic Druidic tradition that are so powerful. I mean, even the Celtic saints, amazing stories. And an amazing tradition, much to be written on that yet.
Indeed, yes. And it feels as though, as a younger person, possibly still, as you move through this time, that you are awakened to the bardic traditions. That the great works of literature were then committed to speech.
Yes, yes. I mean, I see Shakespeare profoundly from that tradition, actually. If you read The Tempest, I mean, that's that amazing connection to nature, and the magical and the mystical is the magus, the druid. It's all there, and it's all endlessly fascinating. And one can watch that play or read that play time and time again, and discover more. It's the most extraordinary piece of work.
Yes, and dare I say, Midsummer Night's Dream as well.
Indeed, yes, love that too.
Yes. Of course, 450 years ago, the sensibility of the time was completely awake to the fact that nature was alive with the anima mundi, the animating principle of the universe. So they believed in fairies. They also thought Robin Goodfellow or Puck was very naughty. He was a changeling, and so if he appeared, he could possibly impregnate a virgin, and so he was also considered to be a fearful substance, a rather naughty sprite.
Yes. Yes, Robin Goodfellow, Robin Hood, Herne the Hunter, of course, yes, and Cernunnos there. Yes, one and the same.
Yeah. And as we move through this rich territory that you're summoning for us, at this time, and the potential books that could be written, the novels that could be written, the presentations that we could be given, the screenplays that could be written, because listeners, you've heard Susan. I'm so sorry, listeners, the chat box doesn't seem to be working, so I know that you've written lots of comments. I'm so sorry, it's just not moving, and my tech manager, I think, is no longer looking in. But so I do apologize, but I will vacuum clean all of your questions up later and see how we can respond to them. But back to what I was actually saying I mean, particular precepts or teachings or moral issues that you feel would be useful for the screenplay writers.
I think, yes, I come back to custodianship of the earth and care of the earth and care of the feminine and nurturing of the feminine. That this powerful, deep resurgence that's now happening of the deep feminine. Those are the precepts and the teachings that I want to see more of. And I think it's becoming the mythology of our time. And I think that's really exciting.
This is beautiful for me because it really resonates deeply with the nature of what I was hoping we would be able to convey. And what I mean by that is, I'm not putting any onus on you because we're doing it, but in relation to deep dialogues, because all that you're describing, the way that I perceive it in my own lens, is that we're moving away from the intellectual clutter of the head into a deeper, more heartfelt, more emotionally resonant vein of energy, these deep veins or meridians indeed that are being opened within Gaia, and how we're feeling the pulsation and the breath rhythm through them to awaken the ancient voices. I was describing just this afternoon with somebody who said, "Oh, you went to Abrahenge yesterday, how was it?" And I said, "Have you noticed the trees? Not just at Avebury, but have you noticed the trees? That the trees seem to be more lustrous. They seem to be emanating a really powerful energy." And she said, "Yes, why do you feel that that's so?" Because at Avebury, the trees were just extraordinary. And
numinous,
very numinous. I couldn't resist to go up and place my back and then my breast, the whole of my body hugged this tree.
Yes, amazing.
Information came piling through. And I heard the tree say in my own, within the imaginal consciousness of my being, we are beginning to reveal the ancient stories. We are revealing the ancient stories of yore.
That's amazing.
We have waited until this time to reveal all of the mysteries and the magic that we have beheld, but that was not necessarily easy for men to receive. And, that was somewhat ironic, bearing in mind that there we were in this so-called Neolithic circle of vast proportion, possibly one of the standing circles in Europe. And of course, as we know, because I know you've ridden through many times on your horse. So many of those stones have been desecrated because the 18th century onward believed them to be pagan.
That's right.
So there's a big message moving through at this time, and therefore being evoked through your words.
Yes.
And will you continue being propagating writers within the sacred island of Albion, or will you be moving abroad?
No, both. I think I see my role as encouraging writers from all over the world. So obviously I've got roots here in the UK and built up my agency here, but and now developing a lot of work in the US, doing a lot of work with publishers and writers out there, and screenwriters as well, and likewise in the Middle East. And so my focus is entirely international now, and I think that's important. I think we are very much a global community, and even with this conversation, this Zoom conversation, I mean, that's another factor of the whole sort of global pause, where the actual sense of global community is becoming all the stronger. Ironically, we're not traveling so much, and yet that because we're communicating so much more readily on Zoom forums, chat forums, etc. So the world is becoming, in a sense, smaller. So yes, I see my work as being international, and yes, well, in the terms of publishers, it's very interesting because during global pause, there's been far more of a pause in UK publishing than there has in US publishing. So things have shifted in that sense for me in terms of the balance of the business. But I see that as a good thing. So so a feet in many camps, I guess. But that's a good thing because the world's becoming smaller.
It's wonderful to hear you speak this, because also knowing you and loving you, to see that here you are expanding your creative horizons. And dare I say
Yes.
that I haven't necessarily felt the same thing from some of the other publishers or indeed literary agents.
But that's the thing, you see, when they're coming from a place of fear, and there's been a lot of fear in publishing lately, because it has been frightening for them. I mean, the margins in book sales have just gone down incrementally. The book distributors have gone into trouble. Many bookstores have closed. So yeah, it's been a frightening time, and those who've gone into fear, this has not been productive. Whereas those who've said, okay, well, we're going to shift gears and work differently, they're the ones who will succeed and will thrive. It is about shifting gear big time, and realizing that things are never going to be the way they were 20 years ago. And so all change, and that's a good thing in many respects.
So we literally just go with the flow.
Yes, I think we have to.
Which is again another aspect of the divine feminine, isn't it? Just simply
absolutely
to
back to water.
Strive.
Yes.
Go through the water.
Yes, back to the goddess and the water. Yes.
And of course, I am reminded of the illumination of talking to a number of very extraordinary ladies around the planet in preparation for these 12 dialogues for female soul stewards coming forward, because I do agree absolutely, or concur, I think is a better way of putting it, because who would not agree with His Holiness the Dalai Lama when he says that the future chapter of history is being written by the women and the girls, that in talking to so many of the remarkable women that I've had the fortune of speaking to, some of whom are not appearing in this particular series, and I'm holding future series, and how many of them have been talking about the arousal of the sacred icons within femininity. You've mentioned Kuan Yin, and I know that Megan Watterson brought forth very recently through Hay House this wonderful book about Mary Magdalene Revealed, and how this is succeeding extraordinarily through Hay House's catalogue.
Yes.
And so again, you speaking of Kuan Yin, there is tremendous amount of information that needs to be revealed through the countenance of these great female icons, whether it be Mary herself or Isis or any of the other goddesses. The goddesses never die was an expression of
I like that.
Dr. Christian Northrup. And of course, God never die as well. But I mean, the most important thing is that goddesses never ever die in the breath and the rhythm of what we're pulsating at the moment. This has been the most wonderful conversation. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the revelations that you provided.
Pleasure.
And for all of you listening in, I hope that's been enjoyable for you. And I'm so sorry that I haven't been able to read. I think there something like 138 comments that I haven't been able to read. I do apologize, but I will tomorrow. I will be. I have a rather busy day of clients, but at some point I will be reaching in, because I know that Susan. Although I'm speaking for her, I'm sure she'll say yes, that we're really interested in what you are feeling and thinking.
100%, yes.
So please do write in. And so I just need to say to the wonderful Susan Mears, thank you and much love to you. And please stay there.
Thank you.
I close down our connection with Facebook so that I can just say on a more personal level, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Stewart. Bye.